Chapter 12. Kelly had had this image in her mind as to how Sunday dinner was going to go. It was going to be like those two hurricanes out in the Atlantic. They were going to plough into her from both sides and rip her to shreds. But things went well. Daniel was ever the gentleman. He repeatedly refused her dad's offers of alcohol and even helped with the dishes. This did have one negative element. Dear brother Nick went on and on about what a great husband Daniel would make someday. Oh, Kelly could have kicked him. On the plus side, Daniel did not seem to react badly to the H word. So did that mean he didn't object to it, or was he just being dense again? Oh, sometimes dealing with a real brainy guy had its drawbacks. Unfortunately, returning to work Monday morning brought only bad news. Hurricane Danica tore through the Georgia-South Carolina region, leaving a wide swathe of destruction. Hurricane Edward was still following its projected path. It was swinging around the tip of Key West, going right over the dry Tortugas, and was now a Category 4 storm. In 2 days, 3 maximum, it would hit the Pensacola area. There was also an almost immediate spike in gas prices. Heidi called a luncheon meeting for the entire staff and projected the latest stats on the storm on the wall of the conference room. Picking up her laser pointer, she traced the most likely courses for Edward. Okay, people, 3 of the 4 models are calling for Pensacola or Tallahassee getting it, so you know what that means. Every head in the room nodded like a bunch of bubbleheads. Yeah, Kelly knew. Nothing motivated politicians into action like a threat to their own person. She still remembered 9/11 and the whole anthrax scare that followed. It had taken a while for Congress to organise a response to the former, but the latter got them making big changes to how the mail was handled. So she knew what was going to happen. Heidi would be sending a team to the area to coordinate evacuation and preparation efforts. Their best team. Kelly raised her hand. Heidi, what about my model? She gestured at the little pink line that curved off to the east and hit an area just south of Tampa, right in the Sarasota area. Kelly frowned. Pink. They'd made a storm track pink. Oh, someone was going to pay for that. Well, that was for later. A red dot appeared on the path as Heidi shifted her pointer. This one? A soft giggle echoed around the table and Kelly felt her face get warm. Yeah, someone would pay. Yeah, that's mine, she replied. Well, I'm sure you've done your best, Heidi said. However, all the other models agree, so we have to put yours aside. Oh, I understand that, but don't you think we should at least issue a warning for the area? Heidi nodded. Yes, the National Hurricane Center agrees with us on that point. The warning will stretch from the Alabama border to Naples. Oh, that's a long portion of the coast, Kelly replied. Yes, so we're going to do the following. The main team, which will include me, is going to head up to Tallahassee. We'll coordinate all efforts from there. Kelly, you anchor the crew remaining here. With that, the meeting adjourned, and the people split up. Kelly couldn't help but wonder where that storm was going to hit, and if her model was truly wrong. She didn't think so, but she had no chance of convincing anyone else of that. By the afternoon, the office was nearly deserted. Most of the staff were on the road, driving north. Kelly had sent several people to Sarasota and a couple of others to Naples. Beyond that, there wasn't much they could do. The governor had declared a state of emergency, and the National Guard was on alert. Also, people were being advised about the usual precautions: evacuate the coast, stock up on food, water, medications, and get some cash and important documents together. Kelly had a very bad feeling about this storm, yet she had the rehearsal for the show to go to, so reluctantly she left the office and headed over to the theatre. Driving up US 41, she looked off to the west. The sky over the Gulf of Mexico was positively black with storm clouds. She did a few calculations in her head. If the storm maintained its course and speed, it would be just west of Port Charlotte by tomorrow afternoon. Flipping open her cell phone, she dialed her parents' house. She hoped they'd be watching the news and were taking all necessary measures to be safe. "Hello, this is Penny," came her mother's voice. "Mum, it's Kelly," she said. "Are you and Dad okay?" "Yes, dear, we're fine, and yes, we're ready for the storm." Kelly laughed. "How do you know that's why I was calling?" "Oh dear, please, you're nothing if not predictable," her mother replied. "We've got quite the full house here now." "Oh, why?" "Well, none of our neighbours have very sturdy houses. They're all mobile homes. So we invited all of them to stay with us." Kelly rolled her eyes. That was her parents, always having to play at protecting everyone. "Okay, Mum, I'd hope you aren't taking on too much." "Not to worry, sweetie. We've got sleeping bags all over the place. We'll be fine." Kelly hoped that was the case and then hung up. Soon afterward, she arrived at the theatre and found it virtually deserted. Only John, Tony and Daniel were there, and they were stowing all the loose gear away. "Well, hello, boys," she said. "So I'm getting the feeling that there's no rehearsal tonight." John nodded. "Yeah, I called it off. A lot of the cast and crew were worried about the storm." "I agree," Kelly said firmly. So you want me to help with anything? How about helping me tie up these curtains? Tony asked. He gestured at the long, narrow curtains hanging along the backstage area of the theatre, on either side of the stage. Those are the teasers and the tormentors, Tony, she replied. Yeah, whatever, he said with a smile. All I know is they're teasing and tormenting me right now. They just won't gather and let me tie them down. The others all laughed. Tony, you make them sound like they're alive, Daniel said. He got down on one knee and patted Roscoe. Hey, when you've hugged the dog for as long as I have, you begin to human-like attributes in just about everything. With that, they all got to work and got everything as secure as possible. After that, Tony suggested they all go to dinner. After all, as the saying goes, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. So let's enjoy life while we can. John rolled his eyes. Oh, Tony, you and your jokes. A lot of restaurants were crowded that evening. Many people had elected to eat out, probably to save their food in the event the storm came near. Kelly couldn't help but be happy at the chance to spend some time with Daniel without Jennifer being around, and it obviously showed on her face. Kelly, what's up? Tony finally asked. You look like the cat about to eat a canary. Yeah, you know something about the storm that we don't, John said. Huh? What? Oh, no, nothing like that. Just glad to be out with friends. With that, they drank a toast to true friends, finished up, and went their separate ways. Once Kelly got home, she immediately turned on the news. The storm had sped up a bit, but also seemed to be angling off to the west a bit. That meant it would be offshore by early morning. Yet what about that high-pressure ridge coming down from the Texas area? If it hit Edward at just the right point, the storm could still swing to the west. Oh, she was not going to sleep easy tonight. Greg and Anne had a difficult night of it. Anne found it impossible to get comfortable, no matter what position she got herself in. Oh, was she ever going to have this baby? Dawn came late, and breakfast had to wait. The news on the TV was not good. Anne could hear the TV on in the living room as she sort of waddled down the narrow hallway from the master bedroom. She passed Jessica's room, which decked out with her many dancing awards and pictures. Jessica was still sound asleep, which was for the best. No sense waking her until needed. The hall reached the kitchen. This neat and modern little space opened up to the dining area and living room beyond. The big screen TV, Greg's one true indulgence, the man did love his football, was on, and he was standing in front of it. Anne didn't have to ask him what the news was. She could see it for herself. There was that familiar satellite image of Florida, and the storm, a massive Category 4, was now heading straight for Charlotte Harbour. Greg turned and his face said it all. Honey, we need to wake Jessica now. What are we going to do? Is there time for us to evacuate? Anne said. I don't think so, Greg said. Lights out, TV off, and the air conditioning stopped. The power had died. Heap, Anne squeaked. We better, what, get in the hallway bathroom? Greg nodded. Yes, it's the most protected part of the house. You get Jessica, I'll grab the radio and our supplies. Anne did so, and soon the three of them were in the bathroom. Jessica crouched in the bathtub. Greg sat on the floor, and Anne sat on the toilet. She just couldn't get down on the floor and be comfortable. Of course, right now, comfort was the last thing on her mind. Within the hour, it seemed as if a freight train was careening around the house. The walls groaned, the rafters creaked, and the toilet bubbled. Anne stood up for a minute. They flipped up the lid and saw that the water was gone. It had all been sucked out. With a huge groan and a snap, the entire roof above them flew off. Mummy! Jessica screamed. Kelly and her team raced about their office. The storm had taken an unexpected sharp turn to the east. Well, unexpected by everyone except her. The power had died, but they had their generators going, and she was trying to get through on her phone. Not her cell phone, of course. The towers were all out, at least in their area. She was trying the good old-fashioned landline. Mum, can you hear me? Kelly said, practically shouting. Barely, sweetie, she replied. Are you all right? Are you still in Port Charlotte? Yes and yes. It's you and Dad I'm worried about. Can you leave and head north? The storm is going to go straight through Arcadia within the hour. Dear, I don't think... Click. The phone went dead. Oh, this was not a good sign. Kelly moved to a computer. The storm was a solid Category 4 and moving rapidly inland. If anything good could be said about it, the least there was that Edward was not going to linger in the area long. Yet what of her friends? How were they doing? What about Daniel? Was he safe? The sound of breaking glass came from the stairs. Something was happening down on the first floor. She and several of the staff raced down the hall to the main atrium. It was a large open room with a round receptionist desk in the centre. Beyond that was the top of the spiral staircase that led down to the ground floor. Kelly stopped at the top of the stairs and looked over the railing. Oh my goodness. Guys, have a look, she said, pointing down. The others joined her and looked. The front doors had given way and the entire floor was flooded. There had to be at least 3 feet of water down there. Well, looks like we're not going anywhere, Zachary, one of the interns, said. Christina, another of the computer techs, looked back and forth across the lower lobby. Ah, you think we're going to be safe here? I mean, will the electrical stuff short out and cause a fire or anything? Kelly shook her head. No, don't worry about it. Everything's properly grounded. Come on, people, we've got a job to do. Let's do it. With that, they headed back to the main room and checked on the progress of the storm. Between what their computers were showing them and the bits they could glean from the radio and out the windows, Port Charlotte was being shredded. And now there was data coming in on something else. A new storm was forming southwest of the Azores. Right now, it was merely a tropical depression, but it was clearly going to become storm number 6 within the week. And still she wondered, where was Daniel right now? Tony looked out his front apartment window, the one that gave a view along US 41 in Northport. Roscoe was off under the little side table at the end of the couch, whining the whole time. Boy, the storm was something fierce. He was glad that it was hitting early in the day. At least the view out the windows wasn't total darkness. Palm trees, deck chairs, lawnmowers, and all manner of assorted household items were careening about out there, as if in a huge blender. Holy cow, that is some storm, Roscoe. Come on, over here and have a look, Tony said. Roscoe just whined. Tony rolled his eyes and opened his mouth to say something else, but paused when he thought he heard something new. He cocked his head. Was that a scream or just the wind howling? Roscoe gave a little yip, and Tony turned to him. No, he wasn't scared. Tony knew that look and that yip. Something was wrong. Tony laughed. What now, you old lassie? What's the matter, boy? Did Timmy fall down the well? The scream came again, louder and clearer, and Tony whipped around to the window. Whoa, somebody is in trouble. I don't know about you, Roscoe, but I'm heading out there to help. With that, he crossed to the door, unlocked it, and turned the knob. Bam! Whoosh! The door flew open, and a massive gust of wind roared in. Newspapers went everywhere, and several of his research papers went from the coffee table to being plastered against the far wall in about 2 seconds flat. Tony held his hands up to shield his eyes and started out into the storm. The raindrops felt like bee stings, and he truly thought his shirt was going to be yanked right off his back. Oh-ho! Talk about a wild ride, eh, Roscoe? He shouted. It wasn't easy to see anything, but when he looked down, Tony could see that Roscoe was right by his side. Ah, such a good and loyal friend. It also wasn't easy to close his door, but he managed. No sense letting his place get drenched and completely aired out. He didn't want to return home to find his place was truly gone with the wind. Outside was the wide and broad parking lot, and already several cars had smashed windshields. Again came the scream off to the right, and Tony turned to head that way. The wind and the rain shifted and changed so quickly and randomly that Tony never knew which way to try and shield his face. Above him, power lines whipped about, making a metallic twang as they snapped and cracked in the wind. Roscoe gave a howl and Tony looked down. The poor little guy was about to be blown away. He reached down and gathered Roscoe into his arms. It's okay, fella, I got you, Tony said. Come on, someone's in trouble. The apartment complex was a series of low one-story buildings. Square-shaped, they were groups of 4 apartments per building, and each building was separated from the others by parking, landscape, and little picnic and play areas. Moving around the corner of the building, Tony staggered and stumbled through the play area. It was tough going. He felt as if he were going to fall over any second. He also didn't see anyone needing help, but he wasn't about to turn back yet. The play and picnic area was ringed by trees, and Tony could just make out the building beyond them. It was clear that a window was broken and a door open. Yeah, that's where the people were in peril. That's where we're going, Roscoe, Tony said. Come on, we'll help them and get out of this mean storm. Weaving his way between the swings, which were all sailing all over the place and past the picnic table, he stepped close to a tree and paused for a moment. Phew, this is too much like work, eh, Roscoe? He said with a grin. Crack! An almost explosive blast sounded above him. Tony tilted his head to look up and had just enough time to see a massive branch slam into him. Ach! He screamed and crumpled to the ground. Darkness swirled around Tony. He couldn't feel anything or see anything, but he could hear Roscoe whining, and then oblivion embraced him. Anne felt pain and knew that they were all well and truly in trouble. She sat there in the bathroom on the toilet, totally drenched. Their roof was gone, and with it any protection from the storm. The rain seemed to come in waves. It would pour down in buckets and then let up for a brief time. Greg lay on the floor, his right pant leg torn and bloody. When the roof went, a truss had plunged downward and snapped his leg like a dried twig. Jessica was doing her best to fashion a splint from the various bits of junk that had blown into the room, but it wasn't easy. Meanwhile, Anne was doing her best to not let the pain show in her face. Mummy, what's wrong? You don't look so good. Anne opened her eyes to see both Greg and Jessica staring at her. You're in labour, aren't you? Greg said. Labour? Jessica squeaked. It's been a while, but I know that look, Greg replied. How far apart are they, Mummy? About 10 minutes, Anne gasped. I didn't want to say anything. Greg rolled his eyes despite his pain. What, you thought if you ignored it, it'd go away? Oh, she gasped, another pain rippling through her. No, but I didn't see the point of saying anything. But what are we, supposed to do about it? As if in answer to her question, the wind and the rain abruptly died. The three of them wiped their faces and looked up. Was the storm over? No, it couldn't be. They must be in the eye. Greg whipped out his cell phone. Now's our chance. I'll call 911 for an ambulance. Ow. Oh, Greg, they're not going to come out here. Anne groaned. Mummy, it's worth a try. A moment later, Greg hung up. He did not look happy. Well, they say they can't come out here to help us. We have to prepare for a home birth, Greg said. Jessica's jaw dropped. Have the baby here. How are we going to do that? Greg forced himself up into a sitting position and looked around. Jessica, see if you can get to my closet and get one of my dress shoes. We need the lace to tie off the cord. Then we need something to wrap the baby in. Honey, you think any of the blankets or sheets are still dry? Anne again cried out in pain. The contractions were getting stronger. Oh, the trunk in the hall. It might have, something. I'll check, Mummy, Jessica said, getting to her feet. It took a bit of pushing, but she managed to get the door open. They all gasped at the sight before them. The house was virtually gone. Beyond the hallway were wood, cinder blocks, crushed furniture, and clothing strewn about. Jessica picked her way among the rubble and returned a few minutes later with one of Greg's shoes. I'm sorry, Mummy, but the trunk is gone, Anne gasped. Gone? That thing weighed over 100 pounds. Empty. I didn't see it anywhere. Jessica shook her hand. No, Mummy, the wall at the end of the hall is gone, and it looks like everything just sort of blew out that way and ended up in the neighbour's pool. A crack of thunder rolled across the sky. The wind picked up and rain began to fall again. Greg forced himself up into a rough sitting position, pure agony written across his face. Honey, we have to face facts. There's no way we can deliver this baby in this house. I'm calling 911 again. Before Anne could even open her mouth, he'd whipped out his cell phone again and was dialing. They sat there a moment while he screamed into the phone in a desperate plea for help. Finally, he threw his phone away in obvious frustration. No help, Daddy? Greg shook his head. No, they won't come. They say it's still too dangerous. At least that's what I think they said. I could barely hear them. I did glean one nugget of information from them. Fawcett Memorial is still open. If we can get there, they'll help us. Anne forced herself up into a standing position and gestured for Jessica to help her father. If we're going to get out of this, Anne said, we're going to have to do it ourselves. So come on, let's get to the car and try. But who's going to drive? Greg asked. With Jessica's help, he got to his feet. Well, he got to his foot, his one good foot. Leaning on her, he hobbled his way out through the obstacle course of debris, scattered across what was left of the living room. Anne, gasping and groaning in pain, followed them, and they made their way to the garage. Their Lexus looked okay, but the garage door was broken and had collapsed inward onto the car and floor. Anne looked the car over. It was still drivable. Well, I sure can't drive. I haven't fit behind the wheel for weeks. With my broken leg, there's no way I can either, Greg said, and then looked at Jessica. Sweetie, you think you can do it? Jessica's tiny chin started to tremble. Me? She squeaked. Dad, I've only ever done it when we went along the beach road, and we were all alone. Greg patted her cheek as the wind picked up even more and began to howl through the holes in the garage doors. Jessica's long hair began to whip about her face, her small, cherub face. I know it's asking a lot of you, sweetie, but this is an emergency. Anne stepped closer to the two of them and smiled down at her daughter. And we'll be right there. Oh, with you. She clutched her stomach and almost doubled over from the pain. Mummy! Jessica cried out. Over at Englewood Community College was one of the evacuation centres for the area. It was there that so many of Daniel's friends had gathered. He looked around. Fabio and Ronald were playing chess, and good old Mama Olga, John and Jennifer were singing songs to some young children. He knew Gabby was safe up in Sarasota. The storm wasn't going to hit that area, so his thoughts turned to Pop and Kelly and her family. How were they doing? If he knew Pop, he was drunk asleep on his couch and oblivious to the whole thing. What of Kelly? Was she in Arcadia with her family, or hungered down at the weather centre in town? He flipped open his cell phone and looked at the display. No signal. So no way of reaching anyone. He so wanted to get his mind off what was going on outside, but that seemed impossible. Oh, and then there was Tony. The man had refused all efforts to get him to join them here. As soon as they could, he and the guys were going over to Tony's place and giving him a good talking to. Imagine refusing to go to a shelter just because it didn't allow dogs. On the other hand, he can understand Tony's loyalty to his faithful friend. Roscoe was such a great dog. Daniel stepped closer to the window of the cafeteria and looked out. He wasn't sure, but the storm seemed to be clearing just a bit, and it seemed to be moving farther east, so Arcadia was next. He cast his eyes over at John. The man was a rock, laughing and singing as if nothing was wrong, yet Daniel knew the truth. John's little beach bungalow was likely gone by now. Would he find anything upon his return home? Ralph had always relied on his faith to sustain himself and his family. It was the bedrock upon which all else was built. Now, as the power died, darkness closed in, and their poor little house creaked and groaned. He wondered if these truly were going to be their final hours on earth. Out their windows could be seen nothing. Every tree around the house had already come crashing down. The candles in the living room gave off a warm glow, but no comfort. He sat on the couch, Penny, his dear wife of so many years, beside him, and looked at the faces of his neighbours around them. None of them looked very confident. Nick stood in the doorway to the kitchen, a radio pressed to his ear as he tried to hear over the raging gale outside. He finally tossed the radio aside and frowned. "No go, people. The location station's gone off the air," he said, trying to sound remotely chipper. Ralph grinned. That was something he always liked about his son. Yeah, he would argue religion until they were both unable to talk, and he often made lame jokes, but he always tried to keep people's spirits up. From above came a terrible crack and snapping sound. Everyone jumped, and several of the smaller children started to cry. Junior, on the floor behind Penny's legs, gave a whine. Nick weaved his way through the labyrinth of people to the couch and got down on one knee in front of Ralph. Dad, maybe we should move the party to the main hallway," he said, a trace of fear in his voice. "It's the most protected part of the house." Ralph nodded. "Good idea, son. You take Mum and all our friends there." Nick's brow wrinkled. And what about you?" "Oh, son, my back would never take lying down there," Ralph said with a laugh. "No, I'll just sit here. I'll be fine." "No, we can bring a chair, or—" "Son, it's too narrow in there," Ralph said quickly. "Now go, and God be with you." Ralph could see the concern and reluctance on Nick's face, but it was clear he got the point. So gathering everyone together, they started for the hall. Well, everyone, that is, except Penny. "Mum, aren't you coming?" She smiled at Nick and held Ralph's hand so very tightly. "And leave your father alone?" "No, we'll just sit here together, as we always do. Besides, Junior likes to stay here with all of his toys." "Maybe I should stay too." "No," Penny replied, her voice incredibly firm. "As a man of this house, you have a duty to perform. Help our friends. Now you do it, young man." Nick started to open his mouth, but then blinked very fast and cleared his throat. Wiping his cheek, he just nodded and led the others from the room. Ralph lifted Penny's hand to his lips and gave it a soft kiss. "Have I ever told you how much I love you, my darling? Every day of every year." Crack, snap, shatter. Something beat and pounded on the wall next to them. A window pane cracked and a blast of air shot into the room. Darkness. Every candle in the room was snuffed out in an instant. "Do you remember the day we met?" Ralph said. "Yes, I was working in that bakery and you came in with your little sister to buy some jelly donuts." The ceiling heaved and groaned and crying could be heard in the hallway. More rattling shook the roof and the snapping of heavy beams could be heard. Ralph knew that sound. The trusses were giving way. "Goodbye, my love," he whispered.